Dr. Eric Olofson is a second-year Byron K. Trippett Assistant Professor in the Psychology Department. He earned his BA from Concordia College in Moorhead, Minnesota, where he double majored in psychology and philosophy. After earning his bachelor's degree, he spent 1 year in the AmeriCourse Vista program, where he created a mentoring program that introduced underprivileged children to the possibility of getting a college education. And he is proud to say that the program is still up and running. He then went on to earn his master's and doctorate from the University of Oregon, where he studied infant cognition and language acquisition. When he isn't teaching, he enjoys trying to keep up with his students during Ultimate Frisbee. I think it's definitely more like beating his students in Ultimate Frisbee, playing with his daughter Soren, and drinking better coffee than anyone on campus. And I would like to add that he's a great professor, and I hope he gives me a really good grade this semester. With the chapel talk entitled Shut Up and Listen, or What I Learned from Jordan Plohr, class of 2012, please welcome Dr. Eric Olofson.
Thanks to all of you for coming out today, as well as to the Sphinx Club for inviting me. At first, I was sort of flattered by the invitation until I realized this is just the Sphinx Club's chance to give professors homework assignments. And for that, I'm sure all of my students thank you, so thanks. So the goal of my talk today is to convince you all to shut up and listen, which is an odd goal, especially for me. I have rarely, if ever, been accused of being excessively silent or having overly open ears. In fact, my ambition of becoming a professor happened when I was an undergraduate with an eye toward being a psychotherapist. And I remember the sudden realization that I talk too much and listen too little to be a good therapist. So I asked myself, what profession allows me to spend my days telling other people what I think, rather than listening to them tell me what they think? And so I became a professor. But back to the topic at hand, shutting up and listening. During my nearly 2 years at Wabash, I've spent many Thursday mornings sitting where you are now, listening to chapel talks, and I've learned that there's a chapel talk tradition that requires me to include a story of how I didn't know what to say when I was first asked, and how I spoke with students and professors and got a great idea that I could turn into an edifying talk. And that's Soren. Hi, Soren. Okay, so here's my story. Like the majority of people asked to give a chapel talk, I had no clue what to say. And that was an unusual experience for me. After all, I became a professor because I like to talk and rarely am at a loss for words. But here I was with a captive audience and nary a thought in my head. After thinking a bit, I had an unexpected thought. It occurred to me that if I didn't have anything to say, I should shut up. Now, the more I thought about it, the more I began to think that it is in precisely these situations where people talk for the sake of talking that the most idiotic things are said. And can I get a show of hands here? How many of you have read an opinion piece in a newspaper or listened to a pundit on TV and thought to yourself, this person clearly didn't think about this enough to have a coherent thought, and the world would be better off if they just shut up? Okay, that's what I thought you'd all say. And I have that thought quite often. And so it was no small measure of anxiety when I realized I was going to be in their position. Like the local outdoors columnist from the Journal Review, who last year wrote a column, and this is no joke, entitled "Columnist Running Out of Writing Ideas." In his column, Brent Wheat talked about all of the things he did while he avoided writing his column, including cleaning his tackle box, thinking about a new fishing pole, taking a trip to the store to purchase some soda, conversing with his friend about mushroom hunting, and thinking about his leaky waders for the fishing season. Clearly, Brent Wheat would have rather shut up, but he had a column to write. They had space to fill. And there I was, with nothing to say, but the lead role in a show that must go on. Okay, so I've covered the first chapel talk requirement. I had nothing to say. Good. At this point, chapel talk tradition dictates that I start my story about how a wiser student or a colleague made that great suggestion, or how I serendipitously stumbled upon a great idea. But I'm going to stick to my guns on this one And this is where my talk deviates from tradition. I want to talk about the merits of shutting up and the risks of talking for the sake of talking. More accurately, I want to talk about my own journey in learning this lesson. Now, this seems like a good time to mention why Jordan Plohr's name is in the title of my talk. Jordan is a sophomore Kappa Sigma from Fort Wayne, Indiana. He's a theater major and a creative writing minor. He spends a lot of his time in the theater working in set construction and design. And I had Jordan in Psychology 101 during my first semester on campus. And in that time, I got to know him as a quiet but very thoughtful student. So I was intrigued when I saw him on the course roster for C&T. And in C&T last fall, I found Jordan to be roughly the same as I'd experienced him in Psych 101. Thoughtful, but relatively slow to jump into the scrum of the class discussion period. And this was despite the fact that he was very, very clearly prepared. I often sat next to him and I would look over and he had notes scribbled in the margins. He had questions that he had written. He had thought more about this material than the majority of the people in the room, often myself included. And the problem was, however, that in C&T, a significant portion of the course grade is based on discussion. And I faced a dilemma. How do I grade a student who I know is engaged intellectually, but who does not often participate in the class discussion? He doesn't often speak up. He doesn't like to interrupt people. And while I understand the value of grading discussion, I was and still am disquieted about the possibility of marking down somebody's grade because he's not as boisterous as the other people in the room. So I made a mental note to discuss this with him. Now I want to emphasize that I thought this meeting would entail me convincing Jordan to speak up more in class, to say, you have good ideas, you have to talk, end of story. Instead, he told me what I needed to do. Gracefully, of course, but the message was clear nonetheless. After my spiel, Jordan commented on the entire situation, and I forget his exact words, but the gist was something like this. He said that he enjoys listening to other people's opinions and hearing what they have to say, and that other students often have very different interpretations of the text than he does. And that by listening to these other people, he gains new insights and perspectives that would not have occurred to him. And the implication was clear. One does not learn necessarily by simply reading a text, but rather by hearing other people's thoughts and capitalizing on their insights. And even if you don't learn anything new, just listening to other people's thoughts can help you organize and clarify your own ideas. It's an understatement to say that I was taken aback. As I noted earlier, I generally approach life by offering an opinion, even if it's only seconds old, and then seeing if people push back. And then we do a back and forth, there's some give and take, and I thrive on that kind of verbal interaction. But as I thought about it, and as I listened to Jordan, I started to realize that this might not always be the wisest approach. I started to realize that sometimes I should just shut the hell up and listen. And I've been thinking about this for the past 6 months. And in the rest of my talk, I'd like to share some of my thoughts on the topic. These thoughts have run the gamut from the culture of this great college to the limitations of what we, as professors, can teach you as students, and to Taoism. But I'm going to start a little closer to home, and I'm going to talk about some psychology. The first reason to shut up and listen is that it is very, very difficult to learn when you publicly commit to an idea. To illustrate, here's a true story. Back in 1954, there was a UFO cult in Michigan. And they believed that in the wee hours of December 21st, a great flood was going to come and destroy the world. They weren't incredibly original. They were, however, to their mind, in possession of some inside information. They had an informant who was an alien from the planet Clarion, in case you were curious, who had conveniently arranged for an intergalactic taxi to come, pick them up at midnight, and transport them to infinity and beyond and escape the flood. Long story short, and I know this is going to come as a shock to all of you, the clock ticks to 12:01, and to 12:02, and to 12:03, and the alien cabbie never arrives. Now, luckily for everyone in this room, a psychologist named Leon Festinger had been watching this cult. And earlier, he had sent a spy to infiltrate the group. And the reason he sent the spy is he wanted someone to infiltrate their inner ranks so that the spy could be in that room on that night and note exactly how the stranded faithful reacted to being left behind. Now, to be clear, Festinger was not interested in why somebody would believe in an alien taxi service. Festinger was interested in what happens when people receive evidence that directly disconfirms their beliefs. And he knew that the alien spaceship was going to have other plans that night. So 6 a.m. rolled around, and the cultists were still there because the aliens bailed and the flood never arrived. So they decided to call it a night. Now, what do you think happened when they woke up the next morning and the whole belief system they had that caused them to leave their jobs, their spouses, and their children turned out to be false? How do you think they reacted? Do you think that they admitted that they were wrong and went back to their old lives? Or do you think that they doubled down, dug in their heels, and started to proselytize? Before Festinger had sent his spy to infiltrate the group, he predicted that the majority of the cultists would choose the latter. They would dig down their heels, and they would start to proselytize rather than admit that they were wrong. And you know what? He was right. The majority of the cultists, rather than leaving the cult, believed that their vigilance that night propelled the God of Earth to call off the flood. Furthermore, the previously media-shy cult started calling media outlets and begging for interviews so that they could spread their gospel. You might be wondering why I told this story in a talk about shutting up and listening. Well, this story led Leon Festinger to propose that we experience an uncomfortable feeling when we have two or more contradictory ideas that we hold at the same time. And he called this feeling cognitive dissonance. In the case of the cult, it was, 1, the honest belief held for so long that the UFO was going to rescue them from certain death, and 2, the fact that this clearly did not occur. The only way for them to believe that they were not complete morons for believing in this prophecy in the first place was to change their beliefs. It was to think that their actions changed the course of human history and that the prophecy, basically, it was still right. Now, this is a stretch to be sure, but importantly, this stretch enabled them to preserve their illusions of sanity. As a result of this incident and many experimental studies, Festinger said that a person is most likely to persist in these disconfirmed beliefs when at least 2 things are true. First, when a person has taken bold and public action on behalf of their beliefs, more or less like sending an all-campus email. And second, when there's a social support network of like-minded people. And this is precisely why you should be careful before publicly endorsing an idea or an opinion. When you decide to do that, when you decide to speak up and endorse the first idea that pops into your head, you might find yourself contorting logic to the point of torture to defend it from attacks that would show you did not know what you were talking about. When you hear disconfirming evidence, you will ignore it. When facts are presented that are completely opposite of what you had predicted, you will ignore them. And you will do this, you will find it hard to back down because of the threat it poses to your perception of yourself as a reasonable and educated person. So, best to shut up. At this point, many of you are certainly thinking that this is absolutely true, but for other people. Your opinions certainly were formed on careful observation and reasonable consideration of all relevant information. And maybe they are, but I want to ask you the following 2 questions. 1, did you form your current beliefs in high school or before? And 2, do you really want to bank on the proposition that you knew the answers to all of life's most important questions as a 16-year-old? When you come to Wabash and you join a group, you align yourself with some people, and you start to make bold public proclamations on behalf of your beliefs, you are decreasing the probability that you will be able to critically evaluate those beliefs. And the ideas that 16-year-old you formed will be the ideas that 36-year-old you ends up with. In other words, you are betting on the fact that you will not learn anything relevant to those beliefs while at Wabash. There's an additional and more pernicious risk of speaking up too vociferously and too often, and that risk lies in the very real fact that you will miss insights from other people. In C&T, I would prattle on about my own so-called insights, but I began to notice these little markers that Jordan had something to say, kind of like tells in poker, little twitches, little ways of furrowing his brow. And from previous experience, I knew that I would want to listen to anything that Jordan had to say. So, on several occasions, by listening to his comments, I learned things about relationships between characters in various texts, or I learned about how the translation might affect how we interpret a given text. But unless I could tone down my own love of my own voice for one damn second and shut up, I never would have heard any of this. He never would have jumped in. And while I was occasionally successful at ceding the floor to Jordan, I'm under no illusions that I always was. And as a result, I have not a single doubt in my mind that my own learning about those texts was hampered. Part of my journey at Wabash has been, and will continue to be, attempting to learn by shutting up and listening to those around me. It is, I admit, a work in progress, but while I might be particularly prone to this, I'm willing to bet that most, if not all of you in this room have, at times, failed to do so. We have kept prattling on rather than listening to other people's ideas. As Dr. Boss noted in his great chapel talk last October, we don't listen to our fellow students or colleagues all that well. We don't even really listen to our friends. Now, we can not listen because we fail to ask, as Dr. Boss noted, or we can not listen because we don't shut up, but the point is the same. We don't listen and we don't learn. Now, all of this is not to say that there is never a time to voice a fledgling opinion. Like many other professors, I've told my students that I'd rather hear a half-baked idea than no idea at all. We can work with that. And it is true to an extent, as long as we recognize that we might be completely 100% wrong. And I think this gets to the heart of what is great and beautiful about the kind of education that happens at Wabash. We should feel unencumbered in the classroom by the fear of looking like an idiot. So I'm going to back up and put this in context for a second. When I would teach courses in child development at the University of Oregon, I would rarely hear guys speak up. I would hear girls speak up all the time, but not the guys so much. And I can't be sure of why this was, but I have a guess. In a coeducational classroom, the guys didn't want to lose face in front of the ladies. If you say something in class that suggests your intellectual prowess is on the level of UFO cultists, your weekends are going to be very, very lonely. In those situations, it's best to clam up and rather not show everybody that you are an idiot, rather let them persist with their questions. Okay, back to Wabash. One of the best aspects of teaching here is that students on the whole are not so worried about looking stupid, or frankly, like smelling like moldy armpits, but that's another discussion. Heterosexual students at Wabash are, on the whole, not at an increased risk of a lonely weekend if you look like an idiot in the classroom. And that, to me, is the best argument for having an all-male student body, and why I'm glad that Wabash College offers men in this country a chance to pursue an excellent education in a single-sex environment. In a classroom of all dudes, there is less risk of losing face, and you can use the support of your colleagues and your professors to become a better man. Now, of course, you have to maintain a balance of using the open atmosphere of the classroom to try your ideas on the one hand, and shutting up and listening to your colleagues' good ideas on the other hand. I have to tell you, though, that we as professors aren't always great at telling the difference between the good shutting up, where you're actively listening, you're paying attention, you're integrating the new ideas with your own ideas, and the bad shutting up, where your mind wanders and you think about how to improve your beer pong technique, or how, if Gordon Hayward's shot was 3 inches closer, Butler could have taken down the great blue Satan. So, we make you talk. And everyone in this room has, at one time or another, found themselves nodding with a furrowed brow, leaning forward, making good eye contact, and a mind off somewhere in Neverland. And so, because of that, without the ability to read your minds, professors make you talk, and we grade the quality of your contribution. It's unfortunate, but it is difficult for us to teach you how to listen within the context of the traditional classroom setting. And so, We make you write papers when you have nothing to say. We make you talk when you might have nothing to say, and we grade you on that. But that is why I, like nearly all the professors at Wabash, have an open door policy. In that one-on-one sort of context, we can listen to you and you can listen to us. We can figure out how you are interpreting what I'm saying, whether or not you're integrating it with your own beliefs or whether or not your mind is off wandering. And so when you come to Wabash, you aren't paying to sit in on our classes. To my mind, you pay to have a group of professors who buy into this idea that an educational culture is one that is best served when a central part of your education occurs outside of the class. That is why you come here, to talk to us at faculty dinners, to have open office hours. In order to truly hone your listening skills, however, you're going to need more than a Wabash education. Even though it is good that we have the open door policy, that's not going to get you all the way there. You're going to need to hone these skills on your own during those late nights in conversation when it's just you and your roommate and a group of friends. You're going to need to take responsibility for this on your own. So hopefully I've convinced you that there are dangers to public declarations of your beliefs and that you should shut up, at least sometimes and in some situations. Now I want to talk about the benefits of doing so. The most obvious benefit is that you're going to learn, which is partly related to the issue of cognitive dissonance I discussed earlier. If you're cautious in public commitments to your beliefs, you'll be better able to critically evaluate them when relevant information comes along. But there's more to it than that. By shutting up, you're also going to be exposed to ideas, you're going to be exposed to more ideas, and so that you're more likely to make an informed choice. Which is why I think it's a good thing that Wabash doesn't allow you to declare a major until your sophomore year. You get the chance to try out different ways of thinking, different ways of asking questions about this world, different ways of knowing before you commit to any one. And there's an additional benefit, that when you train yourself to shut up and to listen and be thoughtful, you can learn things that can't necessarily be put into words. I'm thinking about Taoism here. So for those of you who might not know, Taoism is an Eastern philosophy, concerns itself, at least in part, with how we live in harmony with each other and with nature. As an undergraduate student, and even now, few philosophies excite me quite as much as Taoism does. But there's a problem here. As the great Taoist sage Lao Tzu said, the Tao that can be spoken of is not the eternal Tao. Any attempt to describe how to achieve the things Taoism cares about, how to achieve that harmony, are bound to fail at some level. So, sophomores and upperclassmen will know Zhuangzi's story about the prince and the cook from your C&T class. And the prince would have had a good education. He would have spent many long hours discussing the Tao with his army of teachers, and would have had every reason to believe when he went to see his cook chop up the animal for dinner, that if anyone was going to learn about Taoism that day, it would have been the cook, who probably had less formal education than he did. But that's not what happened. Here's the way that Zhuangzi describes it. Every touch of the cook's hand, every shift of his shoulder, every tread of his foot, every thrust of his knee, every sound of the rending flesh, and every note of the movement of the chopper was in perfect harmony. "Ah, that's admirable," said the prince, "that your skill should be so perfect." The cook laid down his chopper and replied, "What your servant loves is the Tao, and I have applied that to the skill of carving." And after that, the cook went on to describe how, by following the natural markings of the meat, his chopper effortlessly did its job. He doesn't force the blade, but rather, as he says, he uses his mind, not his eyes, to get the job done. And when the cook was finished, the prince exclaimed that on that day, he learned about the Tao. He learned about the way of cultivating life. And through quiet observation, he learned, which would not have happened if he would have assumed that the cook was the one who needed to learn from him. When we shut up and listen to the world around us, we often find enlightenment in the most unexpected of places. And if your idea of an education involves telling other people what you think, you're going to miss these lessons. I want to close by talking about leadership. Part of Wabash's mission is to teach men to lead effectively. And clearly, when you look at the pedigree this school has in producing leaders, you have to come to the conclusion that Wabash does at least something right. But I think that it can do more, and I think that it has to. The fact is that the image of a leader many of us have is the person with the megaphone who can rally people in support of their cause. And for all the great that Wabash does, I wonder if this culture of leadership is always the one that will serve you well in the future. What good is a leader who doesn't listen to other people's opinions? What good is the leader who comes to Wabash more concerned about learning how to support his pre-existing beliefs than facing the possibility that the evidence might require him to change those beliefs? What good is any leader who does not listen but would rather talk? I have actually gone my entire adult life, and actually my life as a child as well, more prone to talking than listening. Maybe, just maybe, on occasion, both you and I should follow in Jordan's footsteps. Maybe, just maybe, by keeping our mouths shut and listening, we will learn things that we would have missed, we would have passed over in our haste to be leaders. And maybe, just maybe, we will all become more informed and better people as a result. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Olofson. I have a couple announcements. First, Teak is organizing a paintball tournament in Attica, Indiana. It will be $35 per person, with half of that money going to the Animal Welfare League. The event's going to be held on April 17th, and please watch your emails for more information. Tomorrow evening, there will be a block party on the mall, as well as bed races. Last year was a great success, and we hope everyone turns out again this year. This weekend, track and field will be at Little States, and that's at Indiana Wesleyan, and baseball will be playing at Earlham. Please wish both teams good luck. And finally, next Wednesday, we have a war with the Dannies. Tennis will be playing at DePaul at 4:30, and baseball will be home against DePaul, also at 4:30 at Mud Hollow. So please try and get as many people out to either game as you can. Let's please stand and sing Old Wabash.